This is my Grandma Bea's caramels, and I have just cut the recipe in half because cooking a full recipe takes 40 minutes when you actually have a full kitchen and a stove, and right now I just have a hot plate. So first off is a cup of sugar, half a cup of Caro syrup, and I'm just going to put my half cup of whipping cream, not heavy whipping cream, just whipping cream in with those ingredients, and then a pinch of salt. Now I've already put the pinch of salt in. Now when my grandma taught me how to make this, I asked her lots of questions, and when people get used to making things a certain way, they just keep the same practice. So this was her. She had the same, thermometer from the 70s or the 60s, I don't know which. It was this old green thermometer that was just like this style, but it was bulky and green and amazing because it didn't lose its calibration. These newer ones, they lose their calibration really fast, so be careful when you're washing them that you don't change the temperatures, like pull it right out of the hot candy or hot whatever and put it right into cold. You can use a thin pan, and you can use a hot plate or the smallest burner on your stove, or turn it to high or medium. It's just that if you want to have a consistent pattern to know how long it's going to take you to cook your candy, or how quick it reaches the 235, we're trying to get it to 235 degrees, you got to keep things as consistent as possible so you know for your own self what to expect. Anyway, so I've changed things throughout the years. The one other thing that's kind of interesting about this recipe is that my grandma, she said you add a tablespoon of wax. She said to me about the size of a walnut of wax. And so I asked her, what would happen if you leave it out? And she's like, I don't know, I never have. So just so you know, I have left it out, and there was no problem with the flavor. The only thing is it helps the form, helps the caramels keep the form. But you can skip it, and it's not that big of a deal. It really comes down to how long you cook it, or if you don't cook it quite as much. If you get it harder, you have to cook it. If you want it harder, you got to cook it longer. If you want it softer so you can wrap it up in the wax paper or whatever, you get it softer. But if you're going to be dipping it in chocolate, you're probably going to want it a little more firm so that you can cut it up into squares and then dip it in chocolate. If you do cook it too much, I've done both. I've cooked it not quite enough. You just pull it back out of your pan and you heat it up for a little longer. If you cook it too long, you just take a quarter of a cup of sweetened condensed milk and pour it in. It'll melt the whole thing down and it'll soften it up. So I just am going to throw the butter in. That's the other thing, is half a tablespoon of butter, and that just makes it really tasty. Now I have also messed up and I've messed this recipe up so many times. You can't really mess it up. It just means what do you need to tweak when you accidentally grab the wrong ingredients. Instead of buying whipping cream, I had bought a heavy whipping cream, and I just don't recommend it because it makes, when it does harden, makes this like thick layer of like fat on the top of it. Not yummy. But I was dipping it in chocolate so nobody could tell, and it was fine. One of the other things that my grandma told me, if you're a candy maker for the holiday season, she would always make her caramels or the marzipan or different centers. She would make all of her centers in September, and then she would freeze them so that come December time, November time, there's not so much work to be done. Get all your centers ready, then dip them in chocolate. And then, because she had an older house, she would go to one half of the house and turn the temperature down to 60 degrees and dip the chocolate in 60-degree temperature. And that worked really well for her because the chocolates hardened up really quickly. And when I've done it in the past, I was trying to accomplish that same temperature drop, but I knew our house. I didn't have two furnaces in the house, so one thing I tried to do was just dipping it out on the back porch, and that worked sometimes, but I finally came to the conclusion it's not the best, because when it starts to get snowy, the moisture is in the air, and the moisture will come and collect on top of the chocolates, and then you get a real problem because chocolate and moisture don't go together, and so it leaves all these spotty things. The other thing is, I found that just dipping it in the garage is the best. It's cool outside and you are undisturbed by most people and you don't have to turn down the temperature in your house. So the recipe called, a half recipe would be 1.5 cups of whipping cream. And I only put 1/2 cup in at first. The reason why is my grandma, she said that she always would wait until the whole mixture would get boiling, then she would add another 1/2 cup, or in the case of a full recipe, she would add a whole cup. And then she'd wait until the temperature got back up, and then she'd add a whole nother cup. And she said, try not to let it get out of temper. Try to keep it up high, the temperature up high. And again, I've messed that up. I've changed it, and I have just added all of the whipping cream at one time, and I haven't noticed a huge difference. So maybe one of these days I'll be able to report that there is a significant reason why you should not let the temperature drop, and you should add the cream at 3 different separate times and keep the temperature up. So we're just to the point, it's just starting to boil, so I am going to add another 1/2 cup. It's just barely boiling. Okay, so there's our other 1/2 cup. And in about 5 more minutes, when it's boiling again, I will add the other cup, 1/2 cup. And this is what the mixture looks like when it's not boiling. So when it gets boiling, it gets all foamy and white on the edges. And you just keep stirring it at that point. You don't want to leave the mixture at that point, or else you can burn it, and then your caramel has streaks of burnt sugary brown darkness. So okay, and this is what it looks like when it is at a full boil. So this is why you also want to have a pan that is at least a 6-quart. A 4-quart pan, it is right up to the brim of the pot, and you don't want to accidentally have this boil over. It's not a fun mess to clean up. All right, and here it is. You can tell it's really nice and thick, and it is just about to 235, and it's pulling away from the edges as of right now. I'm gonna add the wax. Boop, there it goes. We're gonna watch it mix up in there, and then we're gonna just pour it into our very well buttered pot pan. I line mine with aluminum foil, and then I butter it really well, so I can just pull the whole thing out and put the aluminum foil on a cutting board, and then, well, flip it over and cut it up that way. But when you have any other kind of pan, you do not scrape the bottom of it, because the stuff that's left on the bottom is still cooking, and you don't want to pour your caramel in there and then have all these streaks. So I'm not gonna pour all that in there. I'm just gonna leave that stuff alone. But yeah, don't scrape the bottom of your pan. This was probably about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, but it will be at least 10 to 15, 20 minutes longer if you do a full batch. So we're just gonna let that sit, get cool. Sometimes I cheat and put it in the freezer, and then I pull it out. I flip this whole thing upside down on a cutting board, a wax paper with some butter. Flip it upside down after it's frozen and chop it. Softly frozen. And there you go.